I know not everyone is necessarily planning a summit or a team event, but all of us have been to those events within our organization. So I'm hoping that there is going to be some relevance here for all of you in this. So I want to talk with you a little bit about how experience is everything and how we can design transformational programs. And we're going to look a little bit, I want to pull the curtain back for you a little bit on this conference and how this is designed. Some of you have said, ooh, I want to steal this and I want to use this. And I'm like, yes, please do. Please do take it and use it. And I want to show you a little bit about how it's done in a way that hopefully might help you in bringing it forward to some of the things that you're doing. So if we're talking about transformational programs, what does that mean? For me, at a very basic level, transformational just means creating change. You know, if we're just absorbing information and nothing changes, I don't know how meaningful that is. So when I think about transformation, I just think, how do we create change? And we're thinking about programming. That can be an event. It could be a summit, a conference, an onboarding program, a new manager training. It could be a meeting. It could be an offsite. So any kind of programming. So as we're going through this together, I just ask you to think about any program, event, summit, conference that happens in your organization that could use a little tune-up. Any way in which you might want to improve it, whether you're in charge of it or you attend it in any way. So have you ever been to an event, perhaps a conference, where you found yourself sitting in the back of the room, not paying attention, feeling exhausted, checking your email, wishing you were somewhere else? Anyone? Okay, great. Me too. And that's why, so I'm probably the advocate for this kind of programming because I have probably the world's shortest attention span in some ways. Like I can be very focused, but if people don't actively engage me, I'm gone, I'm out. So I attend a lot of conferences and I am in a state of rage a lot of the time because I just see so much missed opportunity for hands-on learning, for connection, and for experiences that matter. And I'm just like, there's a better way to do this. So this is a huge part of a passion for me is how do we shift the educational paradigm of how we gather and learn? And I think as we're in this age of technology, like it becomes more and more important. Like, why are you all here? Like, you could watch the videos on YouTube, right? There's a reason that we come to these in-person gatherings, and it's to be inspired, it's to connect, and ideally it's to learn, it's to become changed, it's to renew ourselves in some meaningful way. So how do we do that? So to a large degree, it's around engagement. So engagement is key because right now, there is an average adult attention span of 8 seconds. It is 1 second less than that of a goldfish. Okay, like really, because we're in such an age of instant gratification, right? We're on our phones, everything is bing, 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 blang, 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 in your face all the time. So if we're just standing here and lecturing for an hour with a slideshow, no one's paying attention. And if no one's paying attention, nothing changes. So if you can't get and hold people's attention, there is no change, there is no transformation. It is the very foundational thing you must do if you want to have impact, period. So how do we create engagement? We do partner shares. We stand up and massage each other. We play games. We do standing ovations, right? So the standing ovations, not only is it a culturally fun thing to do and amazing, any of the speakers that have been up on stage, right? It's like so wonderful to start with a standing ovation. We're showing our love and support for our speakers. It also gets you standing. It also gets you applauding. It also gets you vocalizing. So you're awake, you're alive, you're alert, you're expressing, your energy is flowing, you're feeling good, your heart is opening. That is absolutely intentional. That is part of how and why we're doing what we're doing is to keep you awake, alert, engaged, because what we're trying to do is have this continuous experience for the group and at the same time make it incredibly specifically relevant to you. And if you can do both of those things, keep the group cohesive, traveling together, and make it immediately relevant to every person in the room in a unique way, you're going to absolutely capture people's attention. So this is not happening in most events, and I think I don't have to preach to the choir on that one. What is often happening in a lot of events that you normally see is what I call the flat line model, which looks like this. And it has a beginning and a middle and an end. Not much changes in between those 3 points. And there's a welcoming, there's a speaker, and another speaker, and maybe another few speakers, and then there's lunch. And then after lunch, maybe there's another speaker and a panel, and more speakers, and then it's over. right? And so oftentimes we're sitting that whole time, right? And so people get tired, and then the speakers are trying to give you something really valuable that oftentimes doesn't land. So that's one model that you'll often see. These are unintentional models, of course. Another model that you see is the chaos model, which looks a little bit like this. Kind of all over the place. You're like, why are these people in this order? What is the meaning of this? I'm confused. Where do I go now? What time is it? This person contradicted the person earlier. I'm not sure how to make sense of it. So sometimes you're like, what was the organizing principle of all this, and how does this fit together? So this is also not an energizing way to conduct a program. So if the flat line doesn't work and the chaos doesn't work, what are we moving towards? And I'm going to hopefully give you a model that can be useful. My background is in theater, so I see a lot of things through a theatrical lens. So I would like to put forward a dramatic arc model, which looks like this. It has a beginning, and it has an end, and in the middle, it has a pinnacle. And the pinnacle is the peak, it's the apex, it's the climax. It is the thing that you've been building up to. It is where the promise, the ultimate promise of your event or your program is expressed. It's where you really drive it home. It's where the transformation happens. It's where you go into that stretch zone where you become someone new, where you have a new insight, where there's a revelation that drives it all home. And in order to get to your pinnacle, you have to create culture, community, and safety. You have to create the conditions for the pinnacle to arise in a way that that's going to be accessible to people. Because if you did your pinnacle right at the very beginning, people wouldn't be ready for it. And you'll know it's your pinnacle because it feels like a stretch. And you think, oh, could I do my pinnacle in hour 1? And if that feels like, oh no, that would probably freak people out, then you know that's a good sign that that's your pinnacle. And generally, you want to think of the pinnacle like 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through your event, and then you reverse engineer your event from your pinnacle backwards. So you eliminate everything else, you reverse engineer it to build to that, and at the back end, then you integrate it so that people leave with lasting change. So that's what you want to do. I will say for this event, as I'm building this, I'm thinking about the pinnacle was this morning. So we couldn't have necessarily had that conversation about allyship Saturday morning. We didn't have the trust, we didn't have the rapport, we didn't have the connection, we didn't have the safety yet. So we have to build that together. And so sometimes your pinnacle is going to look high, it's going to be super high energy. Sometimes it's going to look like a valley. So this morning was not necessarily like, woo-woo, pinnacle, but it's deep pinnacle. It's intense pinnacle. It's gravity pinnacle. We really need to be in this moment together pinnacle. So that's what I was looking at when I was designing the conference of this is, for me, the most important thing that we need to be talking about, and how do I need to build everything up to that moment so that that conversation is possible. And when you have all of these pieces in place, between your beginning and your end and through your pinnacle, that's how you get people to transform. That's how you experience the transformation. So for the piece that I'd love to just play with you guys for a few moments around, this culture piece, how do we create culture? Because we're here at a culture conference, so we're talking about that. When you do an event, you have the opportunity to create a mini universe within that time-bound structure, whether it's an hour or 3 hours or a day or a week or an extended program over multiple modules. You can create any world you want as long as you're intentional about it. So the more intentional you are about what kind of atmosphere do I want to create here, how do I want people to think and to behave and to interact, then you can create any culture that you want. So the way that we create culture in an event format is guidelines. So guidelines are the cultural context for your event. So think about values for a company. These are guidelines for an event. It's how do we behave, how do we operate, how do we interact. So they're the mindsets for success. So thinking about an event in your organization, a program, a training, a module, anything that you might want to improve, anything that you contribute to, anything that you're a part of, I'd love you to think for a few moments, and I'm going to give you a few moments to write, what are the mindsets that would help participants get the most out of the experience? That's one question. I'll give you a second question as another inroads to it. The second question is, how can you address the fears, concerns, or resistances that participants might have? That's another way to think about guidelines. So the first question is almost more of the positive way. It's what do you want people to experience? And the second one is what what do you want to assuage for them that they might be coming in with? Like, someone might be really pessimistic, someone might be skeptical, someone might be doubtful, someone might be fearful. So anytime we come into an event like this, oftentimes there's this sense of like belonging. Do I belong here? Do I have something of value? Is everyone smarter than me? How did they get into this and I didn't, or whatever it is? So that might be a way to assuage their concerns. Mindsets that we put forward were around looking for the best, beginner's mind. If you're having fun, you're doing it right. Full participation, right? So these were some of the guidelines that we talked about at the beginning to create the conditions for this culture to arise. And people often say to me, they're like, Jenny, I love going to your events. I meet the best people. The people here are so amazing. And you are, not denying that you are amazing people. And if you set up these cultural guidelines, you can design an atmosphere that brings out the best in people, so that everyone they meet feels like an amazing person. And David Hassel, who was here yesterday, he spoke last year, and he talked about culture and how to get the best out of your team. And he was sharing, if you take this beautiful California pine tree, and you take it out of its rightful environment, and you put it in the desert, that beautiful pine tree is gonna wither and suffer because it's not an environment that supports it. So think about what kind of a tree are you cultivating and what kind of environment does it need to be in for it to thrive? And that's what we're doing when we're creating guidelines. We're reading people's minds. We're saying, I know you're coming in worrying about this, thinking about this, wanting this. How do I create an environment that supports that brings out the best in you so you can get the most out of this experience? Does that make sense? Cool. So I'm gonna give you like 1.5 or so minutes to just write a couple guidelines that could be useful for this event that you're thinking of right now. And I would encourage you to go for quantity rather than quality and try to get at least 5 down on the paper, because sometimes one will lead to the other. And if you can, get 5 to 10. So try to write at least 5 guidelines. You can use some of the ones that we shared, but see if you can get a handful of guidelines down on the page that might be useful for your event to get the most out of the experience. And then as you're looking at the ones you have there, I would say look at your list and think about which one of these is most foundational. For all of these to exist, what is the one that is like the basis for all of the other ones to exist? What would be the one that would be most important for all of the other ones they would come after? If you think of it like a layering, like a sequence, what would be the most foundational thing that everyone in your group would want to know, do, learn, or practice in order to create a successful experience? And then you're just going to turn to somebody near you real quick, share like 1 sentence or so context, and then share your guideline, and then we'll bring it back in. Hopefully that gave you some insight, some ideas. So the 2 big things to think about is, or I'd say 3, creating that dramatic arc with your program. How do you have this peak experience, right? So thinking about what is your pinnacle, what is the thing that you're building up to, and then thinking about what are the guidelines that you're going to create and share, and being explicit about them at the beginning of the event, and helping people to practice them, right? Because a value on a page is not worth nearly as much as a value that you practice and do together. So how can you not only share your guidelines, but help people practice and embody them? And that's how you can create a very palpable, tangible culture very quickly. I need to move on, but I'm happy to talk to you after. Okay, cool. So lastly, that was the exercise. I love this quote, Benjamin Franklin. It is attributed to him, but it is probably said by many people. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. So my big hope for you is that we are all learning and changing, transforming together here today. Ta-da!